Fire is the original technology of the human species. It is the first binary system humanity ever mastered. Simultaneously, it is our most enduring existential threat. To understand the destructive power of fire is to first understand the fundamental fragility of our existence. Whether it is the cellulose of a library book or the intricate steel skeleton of a skyscraper, fire exposes the temporality of all things. Would you agree with me that civilization is the accumulation of knowledge over time? So if civilization is like a relay race where each generation passes on the baton of discovery and knowledge to the next, then fire will be the agent of Alzheimer's. And just like Alzheimer's, fire completely erases. The most profound destructive effect of fire is not just on the physical body, but also on the collective memory of our species. The burning of the Library of Alexandria is one of the most traumatic things that happened to the intellectual history of the West. When part of the library was burned by Julius Caesar, humanity lost the wisdom of our forefathers. I can't even begin to imagine the scrolls and books that were lost that day. The loss here is incalculable. The fire completely vaporized the stories, science, and mathematics of the ancient world. At least in the modern world, we have the cloud. Our data isn't all in one place. When you save a file to the cloud, it is automatically sliced into pieces and stored across multiple data centers in different cities or even different continents. So if a fire destroys a data center in Texas, your data is instantly saved from a backup in London or Tokyo. The physical library of Alexandria was nowhere near as fireproof. Papyrus, the ancient world's version of paper, was very vulnerable to fire. In fact, it was an excellent kindling. It just needed a spark to get going. I would like to highlight that ancient sources say that Julius Caesar did not set out to intentionally burn parts of the library. Here's the story of what went down. Caesar was in the middle of a massive Roman civil war against his former friend and rival, Pompey the Great. After Caesar crushed Pompey's army in Greece, Pompey fled to Egypt, hoping their young king Ptolemy XIII would give him refuge. Caesar arrived in Alexandria just a few days later to capture Pompey. However, when he landed, the Egyptians handed him a gift, Pompey's severed head. They thought killing Caesar's enemy would win his favor. They thought wrong because Caesar was horrified. Pompey was a Roman consul and Caesar's former son-in-law. He ordered that Pompey's body be found and given a proper, honorable Roman funeral. Instead of going back to Rome, Caesar decided to intervene in Egyptian politics. At this time, Egypt was also being torn apart by a civil war between Cleopatra VI, who was 21 years old, and her 13-year-old brother, Ptolemy XIII. They were supposed to rule together, but Ptolemy's advisors had kicked Cleopatra out of the city. Julius Caesar arrived in Alexandria as a Roman consul with the power of the Roman Republic behind him. He demanded that both Cleopatra and Ptolemy appear before him so he could settle their disputes. Cleopatra knew she had a problem. Ptolemy was already inside the palace. He most definitely was whispering in Caesar's ear and framing Cleopatra as a rebel. Cleopatra knew that if she didn't get to Caesar and personally present her side of the story, he will likely side with her brother and she will never be queen again. But she couldn't just walk into the palace because her brother's guards would kill her. Cleopatra then had herself smuggled past the guards, rolled up inside a carpet, and delivered directly to Caesar's private room. Upon meeting Cleopatra, Caesar was impressed by her intelligence, boldness, and of course, her charm. He decided to back her claim to the throne over her brothers. When Ptolemy heard that Caesar took his sister's side, his army besieged the palace, trapping Caesar and his small force inside. So to prevent the Egyptian navy from cutting off his escape routes, Caesar ordered his men to set fire to the Egyptian ships in the harbor. The fire was effective, but the wind was high. The flames jumped from the wooden ships to the wooden docks, then to the warehouses, and eventually to the area where the great library was. So you see, Caesar never intended to destroy the library. But while the destruction of the library wasn't intentional, we will never get back the lost knowledge. If Alexandria was a tragedy of collateral damage, the burning of the Mayan codices was a strike against history itself. In July 1562, in the town of Mani, Yucatan, the Franciscan friar Diego de Landa orchestrated one of the most devastating acts of cultural erasure in human history. Landa was driven by a zealous desire to purify the Maya of their superstitions. He gathered the sacred books of the indigenous priesthood that contained the accumulated knowledge of the Mayan civilization. These sacred books were encyclopedias of astronomy, mathematics, history, and the complex calendrical cycles that defined the Mayan worldview. By Landa's own account, he burned 27 priceless codices and destroyed countless idols. Other accounts suggest the number of destroyed documents was much higher. Landa later wrote in his book,
"We found a large number of books in these characters, and as they contained nothing in which were not to be seen as superstition and lies of the devil, we burned them all, which they regretted to an amazing degree, and which caused them much affliction."
Landa saying he caused the Maya people much affliction is a big understatement. What he did was a cultural lobotomy. By burning the books, Landa severed the Maya from their own timeline. He erased their records of the stars, their lineages of kings, and their understanding of the cosmos. Today, only 4 Mayan codices remain in existence, unlike stone monuments which can be smashed but still pieced together. A burnt book turns to ash and gas. The information is thermodynamically scattered. It is deleted from the universe. Landa's fire created a gap in human history that can never be filled. The threat of complete erasure is not confined to the ancient world. On September the 2nd, 2018, a fire ripped through the National Museum of Brazil in Rio de Janeiro. The museum housed over 20 million items, and this collection was built over 2 centuries. It was one of the largest and oldest inventories in Latin America. The fire was likely caused when an air conditioning unit short-circuited. It was then made worse by a lack of sprinkler systems and functioning fire hydrants. Firefighters were forced to use water from a nearby lake. Among the lost treasures was the Lucia skull. This skull was one of the oldest human fossils ever found in the Americas, while the skull fragments were eventually recovered from the ashes. The integrity of the specimen was compromised. More tragic and less recoverable was the loss of the linguistic records. The museum held audio recordings, notes, and artifacts from indigenous tribes that are now extinct. For some of these languages, the museum's archives were the only record of their existence. When the fire consumed those tapes and notes, those cultures died a second, final death. The voices of those people preserved on magnetic tape or paper were silenced forever. The grief expressed by the scientific community was visceral. Researchers described it as an incalculable loss and a lobotomy of the Brazilian memory. But why is fire such a perfect eraser? Fire destroys through a chemical reaction called rapid oxidation. When a book burns, the carbon molecules that make up the paper and the ink are ripped apart and turned into carbon dioxide, water vapor, and ash. But let me burst your bubble. Actual atoms are not getting destroyed when the book burns. The total mass remains the same. If you put a book in a sealed glass box and burned it, the box would weigh the same before and after the fire. The carbon in the paper, the hydrogen in the fibers, and the oxygen in the air have simply rearranged into new shapes, mostly CO2 gas and water vapor. The stuff is still there. The information has just been scrambled so badly that it can never be put back together. Scientists actually debate whether information can ever truly vanish from the universe. They call this the black hole information paradox. And I say that is the universe's business, because for humans living in the real world, fire is an irreversible process. Just as you cannot uncook or unscramble an egg, you cannot unburn a book. Once the flames took hold of the Library of Alexandria, the information didn't just vanish into thin air. It literally became the air. The smoke carried the data away, scattering it into the atmosphere. This thermodynamic irreversibility is why fire acts as the ultimate delete button.